I wonder when we start to shift the experience of these entry-level roles, how that actually is changing the developmental opportunities of young people as they're entering the workforce.
Welcome to the Joy Powered Workspace podcast, where we help people leaders embrace joy in the workplace. I'm JoDee Curtis, owner of Purple Ink, an HR consulting and talent development firm. And with me is my dear friend and co-host, Susan White, owner of Susan Tender White Consulting, an HR consulting practice. Susan is also a senior executive collaborator with Purple Ink. Our topic today is AI, uncertainty, and the new college graduate experience. As the class of 2026 enters the workforce, many are encountering a far more challenging landscape than expected. Despite steady overall growth, entry-level hiring has slowed. Underemployment is rising and competition has intensified as experienced workers step into roles traditionally reserved for new graduates. At the same time, companies are asking for job-ready candidates while investing less in training, creating a widening gap between education and opportunity. And the data really backs that up. According to the New York Federal Reserve, the unemployment rate for recent college graduates rose to about 5.7% at the end of 2025. That was up from 5.3% just a few months earlier. Even more telling, underemployment reached about 42%, meaning many graduates are working in jobs that don't require a degree at all. Tim Paradis wrote an article in Business Insider in April 2026 that really captures what's happening right now. He says that companies are still hiring, but they're hiring fewer entry-level candidates than in the past. And that's because it's now so easy to apply for jobs, sometimes with just a few clicks or even using AI, that employers are getting flooded with applications. We've seen that as well at Purple Ink. That's making it harder than ever for candidates to stand out. Business Advisor interviewed college career counselors about their advice for graduates, and they said, number one, be flexible and clear about your priorities. Graduates may need to accept a role that isn't a perfect fit or that is considered a stepping stone job that builds skills toward a longer term goal. Secondly, network, and network some more. Talking with business leaders, recruiters, and hiring managers not only helps clarify what employers are looking for, but often uncovers opportunities that haven't even been posted yet. Third, show proof. Employers are looking for more than potential. Proof could come from internships, class projects, leadership roles, or even hobbies. New grads need to be able to demonstrate skills and results and speak well about them. And fourth, demonstrate your AI skills. This is a big shift. Employers increasingly expect candidates to understand how to use AI tools. Not everyone needs to be an expert, but being able to explain how you've used AI and how it adds value can make a real difference. And finally, be patient. I know that's hard. Because of the volume of applications, hiring cycles are simply taking longer. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York reports that labor market conditions for recent graduates remained challenging at the start of 2026, with unemployment around 5.7% and underemployment over 40%. That doesn't mean degrees don't matter, but it does mean many graduates are taking longer to land or starting below their intended career level. Employer data tells a similar story. NACE projected only about a 1.6% increase in hiring for the class of 2026, and nearly half of employers describe the market as only fair. Hiring is also happening later in the year, suggesting that companies are being more cautious. A Forbes summary of ZipRecruiter data found that more than 77% of graduates secured a job within 3 months, up significantly from the previous year. And those outcomes are being driven by greater flexibility. Graduates are applying to more roles, considering different career paths, and accepting less traditional first jobs. In other words, the jobs are still out there, but the path is less direct. So, where does AI fit into all of this? Handshake describes the class of 2026 as the first truly AI native graduating class. About 85% of seniors report using AI, and more than a third use it daily. At the same time, job market pessimism has risen significantly. We're also seeing AI show up more in job postings. A growing percentage of internships and entry level roles now mention AI skills, reinforcing that AI has become part of what employers define as job readiness. So it's a real catch 22, I think, in that these new grads may feel like AI is taking over roles they could have had. But at the same time, when they're skilled in AI, it's helping them get more jobs. So, is AI the reason graduates are struggling? Well, partly, but not entirely. Some research, including analysis from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, suggests younger workers in highly AI exposed roles have seen declines in employment, but those effects appear relatively small so far. In other research, including from the Economic Policy Institute, points to a broader issue, just a simple softer labor market, slower hiring, and fewer opportunities for all young workers, not just those in AI affected roles. So, the more balanced conclusion is that AI is changing the shape of entry level work and also raising expectations. But the bigger challenge is still a cautious hiring environment. And when you layer on the broader macro trends, economic uncertainty, technological change, and shifting workforce demands, it helps explain why graduates are getting mixed signals. There is a long term opportunity, but there is also short term disruption. So, what does this mean for the class of 2026? Well, obviously, graduates are entering into a tougher market than expected. AI is becoming a hiring filter, but the economy and hiring patterns matter just as much as AI. And perhaps most importantly, graduates can find jobs, but often through a more winding path than we might have had in previous years. And that might include internships, project work, broader applications, or roles that serve as stepping stones rather than final destinations. In fact, a recent Forbes article highlighted just how much adaptation is happening. Graduates who worked during college were twice as likely to secure jobs. Internships improved chances of receiving offers, and nearly 3/4 of graduates are now considering alternative paths like freelance work, skilled trades, or entrepreneurship. We're also seeing many graduates intentionally apply below their level just to gain a foothold. And others are exploring graduate school, boot camps, or gap years to build skills. It's a changing system, but not necessarily a broken one. So, as leaders, educators, and employers, how do we better prepare and support this next generation entering a workforce that looks very different from even just a few years ago? Well, we've invited a guest to share additional resources and thoughts on this topic.
Dr. Laurie Cure serves as a CEO of Innovative Connections. Over her 30-year career, Dr. Kerr has dedicated herself to realizing strategic visions, collaborating with executives and senior leaders to drive organizational outcomes, and conducting research on pivotal industry issues. She is the author of Leading Without Fear, a book that addresses workplace fear.
So, Lori, why are recent graduates facing a disproportionately difficult job market despite what appears to be broader economic stability?
Yeah, I think it sounds like such a simple question on the surface, but there's so much complexity I think that goes into it. So I'm kind of excited to just have some dialogue around it. One of the things that I think is important as we think about economic stability is there's a little bit of complexity just in that very piece. I think a lot of the data and the numbers are reporting different kinds of stability versus instability. It also makes me think that the lived experience that people are having is sometimes, for whatever reason, right now, different than what some of the indicators are showing. So even when you think about economic stability, I think there's some complexity in that very statement. But I think when we look at the environment overall, we oftentimes will go to economics as one of the environmental factors, which of course is important. But I think when we look at what this new generation of individuals entering the workforce is experiencing, it's a much broader lens. There's, I'm sure we'll talk about AI and technology that they're entering into. There's a changing psychological contract with organizations that has probably been developing over the course of decades, that is just continuing to impact them in relatively profound ways. I think we're seeing in the economy probably an increase in gig work, an increase in contract work, more kind of short-term thinking amongst organizations versus long-term thinking. So I think there's a lot of these different variables that play a role in how entry-level workers are, assuming entry-level workers are kind of in that 20s frame. That's not always the case, but that those 20-level entry workers are entering the workforce.
Mhm.
Education's another one. Our education systems are wonderful in a lot of respects, but things are changing so rapidly. I think that our education systems are not always able to keep up with the changes in the
Mhm.
workforce processes. So there's a widening gap that we're seeing there. So yeah, just all of those things I think are kind of getting in the way. So I'll be
Yeah.
curious as you think of that long list, what is striking you from what I just said?
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I think it's a combination of several things happening. The one thing that does surprise me is that we also know, or maybe we haven't gotten the impact of this quite yet, but we know there are fewer of the younger generations. So I would think part of that might actually create more opportunities since there are fewer of them.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the case in different industries. It seems like different industries are actually experiencing this question in different ways as well. So,
Yeah.
if you think about the tech industry, they're probably in the position that you've described, where they're looking for people that are coming with immediate skill sets that can hit the ground running. They're having It's not that the talent doesn't exist; they're having a hard time, I think, finding the right talent with all of the right pieces that they're looking for. Healthcare, on the other hand, or more of the trade professions are in a much different. They're having a much different experience with hiring and their talent acquisition and what they're looking for and how they're arriving at it. So I think industry wide, it looks a little bit different as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense to me too.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I do want to dig a little deeper about the
Yeah.
AI component of this. Yesterday, we got in the mail our most recent Wired magazine,
Oh
and
yeah. Yeah.
the cover of it was so clever. It was about there was like an office chair with AI or die, and they had this. The caption was, "Your boss has a new 5-year plan. Are you in it?" You know,
Uh,
I thought, wow. So let's do dig in because I think that's what I'm hearing a lot from people getting ready to graduate from college, recent hires are struggling to find a job, is that they think companies are just being really reluctant to hire because they don't know how AI is going to help them do without people. So what do you
Yeah.
think? Can you speak to that, Lori? The decline of entry level roles perhaps tied to the idea of AI reshaping early career opportunities.
Yeah, so it actually is a fascinating question because I think what we're hearing and, a lot of CEOs are talking about it on podcasts that we're not planning. We can't plan as long as we used to. There was a
yeah.
time where you could have sometimes even a rough idea of what 20 years would look like, and now 1-year planning is not even the case. I think it was the CEO of LinkedIn, they do 6-week planning cycles. So
Wow.
this notion of even of planning, and I think that's strategic planning, I think that's talent management and workforce planning. It kind of filters through the whole organization. And AI is probably a piece of that, along with a lot of other kinds of changes that we're experiencing in our external environments. But it's also an interesting piece to think about how individuals are entering the workforce amongst that AI. I don't know if boom is the right word, but the AI's the reality that they're experiencing as they enter the workforce. The jobs that used to be learning types of roles where we would kind of come in and do maybe junior tasks like report writing and data analysts analysis and those kinds of things are being shifted pretty significantly by AI. So those
Mm.
entry level roles are shifting along with that. So it makes me wonder as things progress with AI, how skills like critical thinking and um, collaboration and some of those more soft emotional intelligence skills become important. I also
Yeah.
wonder from the developmental side, I'm keenly aware that our first jobs are so critical to our development. There was a great TED talk, and I wish I could remember the speaker, and she talked about the critical value that our 20s play in our learning and growth, like potentially one of the most important decades of our lives in terms of our growth. And I wonder when we start to shift the experience of these entry level roles from everywhere from applying for a job to interviewing to getting the job to the experience you have in the job, how that actually is changing the developmental opportunities of young people as they're entering the workforce. And I don't know
Yeah.
that we have the answers to what that looks like yet, but I think it's fair to say that it's going to look different.
Yeah. Well, on that topic of training and investing in that, there's what we're hearing about called the experience paradox, where companies are expecting job ready candidates, but yet investing less in training, which seems to be, a double whammy hit there. What do you
Yep.
think about that?
Yeah, I would totally agree with you that it's a double-edged sword, so to speak, that we want the skill sets, but we're not willing to train them. I would have to believe that there's going to be some significant long-term impacts to that. But if you even look in the short term, what it's requiring of candidates, even candidates that are coming out with a 4-year degree or 2-year degree, whatever that looks like, they're having to supplement that education just to be qualified for a position. So you'll see things like online education certificates. Those types of industries are kind of exploding because we are required to have some of those more immediate skills as we're entering the job force. And I talked earlier about contract work because I think and none of this is good or bad in and of itself. It just is and it has an impact. So if more work is moving to contract type work or gig type work, and I know those are two different things, but if we assume contract work, for example, then you are expected to come in. It's probably a really great business decision. You don't have to pay for training and all those things. You're getting people that can hit the ground running. Productivity skyrockets, but then productivity skyrockets at the cost of what else?
Mhm.
And I think that's where the short-term thinking comes in a little bit. If we're always kind of looking at short-term metrics, quarterly productivity and finances, those types of things, then we start to miss the long-term picture because we're not actually looking at what the implications are long term to our workforce.
Right.
So I think organizations are also, when we talk about that cautious piece, I wonder about they're cautious about training people for the streets, so to speak. So they don't want to, at one point, retention was a really critical workforce metric. And I think in a lot of organizations it still is, but when we stop looking at some of those things, then we stop investing in the pieces that drive retention.
Hmm.
And so then we get a
Right.
little cautious and we start pulling back on the things that would drive that retention.
Yeah. That we need the most, right?
Yeah, don't you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this might
So
take us a totally different direction, but as for whatever reason, maybe it was the look on your face that made me made me think of this statement. I think younger workers, I believe for very right reasons, are looking for something different in their work. They're coming out with a much different economic picture than I did 30 years ago when I entered the workforce. Housing is more difficult, affordability is more difficult, so I think they're not looking for a job for the same reasons. They are wanting a a organization that is more aligned to their values. They are wanting more flexibility in their work. Their work is not going to just be their life, but I think they're recognizing that it's a significant aspect of their life, and they want that work to align, which is so
Yes.
perfect for the work that you guys do, and in saying how do we create roles that are passion filled, that do support us in 30% of our life's time.
Right. Right.
Lori, this discussion is so interesting because we've done episodes on skills based hiring and how
Mhm.
popular that is right now. And it's really, I think about the concept behind it was democratizing the fact that you don't have to have a 4 year degree. You don't have to go to college. We should be thinking more broadly. Let's hire for skills first. In fact, I think the current government administration was very vocal about we're going to do skills based hiring in our government jobs, even.
Mhm.
Interesting. The counterbalance to that is what about Gen Z? What about people who don't have that work experience that they can point to show they've got the skills? What advice do you have? I mean, I'm sure we have many listeners that are Gen Zers or Gen Xers that are, maybe really on the borderline or parents of Gen Zers really thinking about how do I get my start? How to get those skills? Do you have any practical or tactical advice that we should be sharing today?
Yeah, and I even write about skills-based hiring. It is kind of an important trend that's occurring right now. What I also would emphasize with that is that skills, the skills of the future, are going to go beyond those technical competencies. And technical is a little bit of a broad term that I'm using, but the things like adaptability and critical thinking and emotional intelligence are going to become ever more important because those are a lot of the pieces that can't right now be replaced by technology. And I think we'll see a pendulum swing. Like right now, I think we're in a lot of places we're kind of dehumanizing our processes. Even if you look at the interviewing process, we file all of our resumes and everything are online. I was actually just having a conversation with someone. I'll get back to your question, I promise. All of our stuff is online. Can you actually go into an organization anymore and see an HR rep and fill out an application? It just doesn't occur like that. So then you have an AI that is analyzing for words and all of those pieces. Oftentimes, you'll even have your first interviews with AI. So we've taken a lot of this personalization out of the process as well. And I think that pendulum will swing back. So I think those personal skills are going to become even more important. But in terms of advice for young people, I think that it's important. One of the pieces of advice that I got from my dad, and this was again 30 years ago, was your first jobs should really be jobs that promote your own growth and learning. So really being selective about those roles that you take and worrying less sometimes about the other extraneous factors, the status of the company, the maybe even sometimes the salary and saying, what is it that I can learn and grow from in this first job? Because that's where your skills are going to start to you're going to really start to get some of those foundational skills. I think on maybe the other hand, there was a time where we thought we would enter a career and that's the career we would take. And that's
Mm.
not the case anymore either. Give
Yeah.
yourself flexibility to realize that your first job doesn't have to be what you stay in forever. So if there's some foundational skills that you're getting in your first job, but it's maybe not your field or something
Mm,
else, then there's some opportunities to take advantage of there as well.
that's great
Yeah.
advice. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
It is. And Laurie, kind of a different look at this. We know that when people are looking for a role, their first role, or even, their fifth or sixth role, it is difficult mentally, right? People can get down on themselves or
Yeah.
depressed or feel like,
Oh, you're speaking my language now.
yeah. So, what are your thoughts for these early career professionals on the psychological and cultural impact of having a longer job search? How is that impacting them?
That I think that is a significant, significant issue. A lot of my work as an organizational or a business psychologist is in this realm. So, if you'll go back to Psychology 101 with Erickson, we know that we go through very typical stages of development. And in our 20s, we are at a stage of development where we are finding ourselves. We're finding our own voice. We're trying to figure out what we believe, separate from what society, our parents, other figures believe. We're still belonging is still really important. We're still forming our identity. So these processes are very impactful. So when you think about the amount of resumes that a single applicant has to send out right now, to get one single job interview, I don't know the exact data, but it's significantly more than it was 20 years ago. And there's a lot of rejection that goes with that. And when you have rejection at a stage of your life where acceptance and inclusion and belonging is so critical to your own development, it takes a different hit to your psyche. So I think your point is really well taken, that depression and all of those things become a pretty significant concern in the process. And so for young applicants, it is important for them to learn from these pieces and really separate the process from them personally. That this is
Mhm.
not about them being rejected. This is a process and an environment that exists that's just going to be rejection.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it makes me think too about just how much we learn from the process. And again, going back, 20 years ago when we were in the interview process, you learned a lot from being in interviews and understanding what you did right and wrong. And so some of that learning has been taken away as well, but the learning has changed.
Right.
So how do they continue to develop in this new environment, without internalizing some of that rejection and some of those other pieces?
Yeah. Which is an easy.
No, it's not. It's not easy for any of us, really. And it gets
Right.
exhausting and it gets defeating and you get tired of wanting to keep going. And
Mhm.
yeah,
Right.
Yeah,
it
very
also
fair.
makes me think, and again, I keep taking us different directions, so I hope that's okay. It also makes me think about just the fit with an organization, that we kind of used to look about, like whether we fit within the organization. And I think now new hires are starting to look at whether the organization is the right fit for them. So
Mhm.
it's a little bit of a shift and kind of a little bit of a different responsibility that organizations have.
Right. Right.
Ah, very fair. So, Lori, what's one small step or change that you've made during your career that's boosted your joy at work?
Oh, that's such a good one, and I think it's so dependent on kind of what all of our own, I'll call them little demons are. So, my demon was always saying yes to things that I didn't really wanna say yes to. So I think, probably the one thing that helped served me the most was getting really clear on what was fulfilling, what did align with my strengths, what was joyful, and saying yes to those things much more frequently.
Yeah.
Great advice
Right.
for all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lori, how could our listeners reach out to you or engage with you if they'd like to?
Yeah, the best way to get in touch with us is on our website at innovativeconnectionsinc.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn at Laurie.Cure.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, Lori, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Jody, we have a question that was brought to us after the April 26th episode on conflict as a catalyst. In this episode, we had talked about people who lie on their resumes and during interviews to help them get a job, a better job, or to get higher salary. The listener would like to hear more about this and what can we do to mitigate it?
Yeah. Well, as a reminder to all of our listeners, it was the January 5th, 2026 article by Cheryl Jackson in the Indianapolis Star, and it was entitled Job Search Lies: Who is Most Likely to Fib During the Process? Yikes. The statistics were a bit alarming, noting that 24% of respondents said they lied on their resume, 6% admitted lying on their cover letter, and 19% admitted to lying during an interview.
Ugh.
So, what are they lying about? Well, they're lying about skills, abilities, responsibilities, years of experience, disabilities, race, veteran status. So, in my conclusion, basically everything.
Yeah.
So the question is, how do we mitigate this? Well, we did mention multiple things on that podcast, such as background checks. Remembering that background checks can be used not just for criminal issues. A lot of times people think of a background check as checking your criminal record, but you can also include on those certification confirmations, links of service, education, degrees, and more. And reference checks, even if you only get the dates of employment and job titles, would verify their length of service and what role they had. And then, as always, we always recommend asking behavioral based questions and digging into their answers, right? Asking more. Tell me more. Tell me why. Why did that happen? What did you do? Sort of questions to follow up on them. But some other things you might do is to ask for technical or skills demonstrations, like using case studies or asking for work samples or maybe some real-time exercises that you put them through to see if they really have the skills and experience you're looking for. And of course, watch for inconsistencies across the stages, right? What did they say in their resume? What did they say on the phone screen? What did they say during the interview? And do all of those align? And of course, use all of those approaches, right? Make it a multi layered approach where you combine screening, interviews, verifications and background checks, and assessment tools as well. Also, document and standardize the process. Provide structured interviews, consistent questions, and clear scoring criteria to improve accuracy, fairness, and legal defensibility between all of the candidates you're talking about. And I think one that still doesn't happen a lot is training your recruiters and or your hiring managers. Train them on these issues. Train them on how to do good behavior-based interviewing so that they know what are they looking for. And don't just give them questions to ask. Help them train them on what answers they're
Mhm.
really looking for. Any other thoughts on that, Susan?
The one that just occurred to me is when we're doing investigative interviews and we're trying to, unravel some problem inside your organization, when you interview people, you always say, I'm going to be asking you a series of questions. I'm going to ask you to answer them honestly and fully. Now,
Mhm.
I just wonder, because studies have shown that if you ask someone before you ask the question, they're more likely to tell you the truth. It doesn't mean they necessarily will, because some people will still lie, but it does raise the stakes and it does get people to be more disclosive and to be more honest. So I
Yeah.
don't know if you can say that in an interview when you're trying to hire someone, just say, hey, I'm going to be asking you a series of behavioral interviewing questions. I'll be asking for specific times in your past where you've used a skill we're going to need you to use in this role.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to be honest in your answers and be fully disclosive. I just wonder if that one little tweak might not help reduce the reduce the incidences of lying. I might
Yeah.
try it.
Oh,
Yeah,
I love that. I
why
love
not?
that suggestion. So, Susan, it's time for In the News. For many Americans, finding a job in 2026 is not a quick or straightforward process. According to a 2026 study by the United Way of the National Capital Area, they found the following statistics related to job seekers.
The overall average job search length of time in the United States today is 6.6 months.
A generation that ranges from 5.9 months for Gen Z and 7.4 months for baby boomers.
Not a surprise when you think about it. When you do get older, it is harder to get someone to take a chance on investing in you. So that
Right.
number doesn't surprise me. By industry, it ranges from 3.7 months for those in the construction industry up to 9.7 for technology workers. That
Wow.
does amplify that tech used to be where every job candidate wanted to be in to now they're doing lots of layoffs, not as attractive. And certainly construction, we never have enough construction or people in the trades, do we?
Yeah. Right. Right. And the average job seeker applies for 63
Mm.
jobs, but the average laid off job seeker applies to 95. That is crazy.
It is. It kind of reinforces that it's better to look for a job when you have a job.
Right.
The old adage, right? Because if
Right.
you've been laid off, it for whatever reason, employers are more reluctant, allegedly, to take a chance on you.
Yeah. Yeah. And one stat that really stuck out to me was the duration of unemployment by state. I really never thought about states having different amounts of
Mhm.
unemployment. And the mean duration is 6.8 months, but that ranges from only 2.5 and 2.6 in Maryland and Iowa to 6.8 in New York and 6.6 in Washington, D.C. That's a huge difference there.
It
So,
sure is. When I think about how close Maryland and Washington, D.C. are, that
right,
really surprises me. Yeah,
right,
interesting.
right, right. Well, thanks for listening today. And if you're SHRM certified, you can get credit for listening to this episode. To get the code, go to getjoypowered.com/SHRM and fill out a short evaluation. When you finish, you'll get the code and a link to a proof of participation certificate. The code will expire on June 29th, 2027. Again, that's getjoypowered.com/SHRM to get the code, and it will expire on June 29th, 2027. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your dedication to the profession. Please tune in next time, and as always, make it a joy powered day.
Thank you. If you like the show, please tell a few friends about us and let us know what you thought by leaving us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening right now. Become a Joy Powered member to get extras like early access to episodes, video versions of the episodes, bonus episodes, and even more. Learn more at patreon.com/joypowered. You spell Patreon, Patreon. So it's patreon.com/joypowered. You can find more information on our podcast, books, blogs, and more at getjoypowered.com. We're at JoyPowered on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And you can email us via joypowered@gmail.com. Make it a joy-powered day.